but hey. So Bags, how long have you been covering the Giants? I know you're with the Athletic now, and you've been with them for a long time, but you've been covering the Giants for a long time. How long has it been?
Yeah, my first year, I'm Dave Fleming and I came in together. 2004 was my first year covering the Giants, and prior to that, I covered the team down south, who shall not be named, and prior to that, I covered the other team down south, which I guess we can name them, the Angels, although I guess they took the Giants out in a World Series, so maybe we can't name them either. But covered them for smaller papers, suburban papers, but I did get my first chance to be a full-time traveling beat writer down there in Southern California, and have been doing it for about 5-6 years, and then started with the Giants in 2004, and a few years have passed. So
that's a long time. Yeah, you do a great job, and I mean that. And you know how I feel about you. I love reading your game stuff, and you're not afraid to dig deep. And I respect you for that. I don't always agree with you, but I respect you, and I guess that probably means you're doing a good job, right?
Yeah, if everyone's upset at you a little bit, then you're probably doing a good job.
Well, you got people worked up a little. You got the Giants fans worked up a little bit. Your article that I think it was in yesterday or 2 days ago in the Athletic had to do with the Giants, and are they going to spend? And it sounds like maybe they're not going to go after the high-priced pitchers, which it's a big deal. The Giants fans, they take this stuff very serious. But your article, you could tell, well written, but I mean, you dug, and I found it to be incredibly interesting. So tell us kind of how you got this article going, and where kind of the timeline starts, because the feeling I got was maybe it was at the meetings, the general managers meetings a couple of weeks ago. Is that when this whole thing about, well, we're not sure we're going to spend on the big picture started?
Well, I think the first thing is Greg Johnson gave a couple of interviews, one to John Shea, one to Susan Slusser, and in both he was pretty consistent, saying that we have to be really cautious about giving out big, long-term, multi-year, 4, 5, 6-year deals to pitchers when they already have a lot of multi-year deals on the books now, after signing Willy Adames, after taking on 8 years of Rafael Devers. And so what I wrote the other day was really just sort of a continuation of that. It wasn't any great new revelation. What maybe made it take on a little bit of legs was I was on vacation last week. I was out of the country and just kind of keeping tabs on stuff. And after what Tatsuya Imai said on that podcast in Japan about not wanting to join the Dodgers, wanting to make his own way, wanting to beat the Dodgers, I think that really kind of created a lot of buzz around the idea of the Giants maybe signing this guy. And you can understand why. It's not just that, Giants fans are tired of sort of being second banana to the Dodgers, although the whole National League really has been. They're tired of the Dodgers getting all the shiny toys, and they want a guy they can really be excited about, who's got a little bit of unknown. I don't think Imai is anywhere near Yoshinobu Yamamoto in terms of his stuff, in terms of his ability to do what Yamamoto did in October, but he does profile as a really good starting pitcher. And I think the Giants fans were sort of excited about, hey, we could get in on this. We could sort of reestablish San Francisco as a place where Japanese stars want to come, because we know about the Judges, we know about the Stantons, we know about the Bryce Harpers, but they've really struck out on Japanese players, not just Yamamoto, not just Shohei Ohtani, but they really wanted to sign Kodai Senga. They thought they had him signed, and he went to the Mets. They were in on Seiya Suzuki, maybe not all the way to the end, but he chose the Cubs. Mm-hmm. So, this is something that they have to break the ice at some point. And I think that as I sort of asked questions and started to explore around, hey, could there really be a match here? Then it was made very clear to me that they are not going to be in on Imai for where the money's going to go, and they're really not going to be on any of the starting pitchers. And I want to say this. I do believe Greg Johnson when he says they take everything on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that, yeah.
They thought Carlos Correa was the right guy for them. They were ready to give him $350 million. They thought Rafael Devers was the right guy. They traded for him, took on $250 million. They thought Willy Adames was the right guy, the right position. They gave out a franchise record contract, $182 million. I just don't think they see in this free agent class anybody who's really worth stacking on another huge contract for. And that means it's going to be incumbent on them to get creative, whether it's trading, whether it's, finding ways they can raise the floor of the roster. We've already seen them do that, getting Joey Weimer, getting the lefty reliever they just signed from Cleveland. So it may be a very unsexy offseason, but that's kind of where they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is a good one. That I think if they feel as an organization like it's the right person, they will do it. I think the fans feel like Amaya is the right person because, listen, fans get worked up. I mean, and for understandable reason. Here's a young pitcher, Japanese. There's a lot of reasons why I think this kid is probably going to be very successful, but maybe the organization doesn't feel quite as strongly as the fans do. I think that's where maybe the irritation comes from the fans. And it's not just the Giants organization. It's almost like Bags, like, well, the fans want the organization to feel the same way they do about a player. And maybe they just don't.
Yeah.
Maybe they just don't.
Yeah, and there are reasons why I spelled out, in that piece why, maybe they're not, going to field a top 5 payroll this coming season. They haven't since 2019, and that's something that you hear consistently from fans. With the revenues they bring in, with they're supposed to be one of the game's jewel franchises. They should be spending at that level, but in any business, you don't spend just to spend.
Yeah.
I'm never going to disagree with someone who says the Giants should be spending more on players. But, if you go into the supermarket and they don't have anything that looks good to eat, you go out to dinner somewhere else, so I think that's kind of where they are.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's a fascinating subject matter. And the one, we sat here last year, and there's a couple other things I want to hit on with you, but we sat here last year, Bags, and it was the same sentiment about Corbin Burnes. Remember, it came out, everybody said the Giants are the number one choice, and then it dragged out, and it turned out that it was never really close to happening, and the Giants didn't want to go to a 6 or 7 year deal with the pitcher. Maybe that's just their thing. I don't necessarily blame them for that, but it was the same thing last year with Corbin Burnes. Now, it wasn't a Japanese pitcher, but Burnes ended up getting 6 years, 210, and I don't think the Giants even ever thought about giving him that. And it turns out he's hurt, and he'll still come back, and he'll probably still be a good pitcher. But that was one of my thoughts when I read your article was, this is the same deal as Corbin Burnes. Because everybody said the Giants are his number one fit, and it turned out they never really were his number one fit.
Yeah, and maybe this is coincidental, maybe it's not, but same agent, Scott Boras, with both pitchers. So, did Amaya go on that podcast and say, hey, I want to beat the Dodgers? Was that, kind of a scripted move? Make up your own mind there. But, I do think it's going to be interesting to see how, as long as Buster Posey sits in this chair, when is he going to sign a Scott Boras client? And I made mention of that in the piece too, because the last time these guys did a deal, there were some, step toes. I mean, Buster Posey, kind of circumvented Scott Boras to try to get the extension done. This is before Farhan Zaidi was relieved of duties, but there were some sticking points, and they just wanted it done. And the way Buster's a very A to B person. Look, do you want to be here? Yes. Okay. We're going to offer you market value. Is this your market? Yes. Is this fair? Okay. If you want to be here and this is what you're looking for, then that should be it. There should be no other impediments to getting a deal done. And I think that's why he hasn't given out contracts with opt-outs. He hasn't, kind of allowed agents to kind of drag out the process on him. At least with Amaya, he's got a posting window of 45 days. It ends on January 2nd. So he thought, well, if the Giants were willing to play ball here and they were willing to give him kind of the top dollar contract, this is not something where Boras could take the air out of the football until, end of January, February, whatever.
Yeah.
But, they didn't like the player enough, apparently. And so that's kind of where they are. But it's going to be interesting to see, hey, the next time the Giants do evaluate a Scott Boras client and they want him to be a part of their mix, how's that negotiation going to go? Because Max Scherzer is a Scott Boras client, and he's a guy who very well could be a fit in that rotation.
And I wonder too, maybe, you talked about this meeting they had at the general managers meetings with Amaya's representatives, including Boras. I mean, who knows? Maybe they got turned off by what was said, like, hey, we're looking for an 8-year deal for $200 million. I mean, maybe that turned the Giants off and said, we're not going there. I mean, we're not going there. Do you think that's a possibility?
That might be getting a little ahead. I'm sure it works in different ways, but when I've talked to agents, when I've talked to baseball executives, there's just a lot of tire kicking that goes on at the GM meetings. You generally don't get right into terms. It's pretty much saying, look, we're interested at a certain level. But generally, they don't talk terms that early. I'm sure there are scenarios where they do, because some players do sign that early.
Sure.
But I don't know if they necessarily got scared off or whatever, but I think they made a determination that this was not going to be feasible for them.
Yeah.
And they're moving on to other pitchers. And it's kind of funny because you had another pitcher signed today, Cody Ponce, that they liked a whole lot, who was the really kind of exploded in Hanwha in the KBO, and is a guy that they've really had their eye on for a long time and thought he might be a good value. And it turns out he gets $30 million over 3 years from the Toronto Blue Jays today. So even his market kind of outshone where the Giants, wanted to be, where they were comfortable spending. But you got Toronto very quickly has signed Dylan Cease, a $210 million contract, and now Cody Ponce, and they've already replaced Chris Bassett and Max Scherzer. So we'll see where those dominoes fall, because those are two guys who make a lot of sense as Giants. Yep. And you could also look at Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly. I mean, there are going to be some pretty decent pitchers out there, but they're not looking for someone to be an ace ahead of Logan Webb. They're not looking for someone to be an ace ahead of Robbie Ray. They're definitely looking, I think, for bulk, for innings. Grant Brisbee wrote a good piece the other day saying, hey, Tyler Corbin, he's not going to be the shiniest gift under your Christmas tree, but guys like him would have their place on this team.
Yeah. You brought up something in the article too, which I knew that there was some number out there, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And it has to do with the Blake Snell contract, which now, when I read the things that you threw out there about the Snell contract and what the Giants still owe him, I mean, it just makes you realize that this contract was a complete disaster. And this is, here's a big money guy. And I know he only got a 2-year deal with an opt-out, but everybody wanted the Giants to get Blake Snell, and they anteed up and they paid a lot for him for what ends up being 1 year. And I think everybody knew it was going to be 1 year, but now you start looking at the ramifications of that contract. And to me, it's a disaster. They still owe him $17 million on a bonus. Is that accurate?
Yep. They what they did is they deferred the signing bonus. They made a ton of it in signing bonus, and there's reasons for that, but a lot of it's just cash flow.
Sure.
This was a way for them to keep their cash payroll down. And we always are obsessed with the CBT payroll, the competitive balance tax, luxury tax, call it whatever you want. That takes the average annual value of multi-year contracts. Yeah. And that way you can't pay a guy $2 million 1 year and $40 million another year. You're taking the average. And so we look at that because we've sort of, treated that as a soft cap in a way. And the Giants have gone over it. They went over it, just 2 years ago. But really, if you're running a business, and the Giants are running a business, they're looking at money out the door every year. And so a lot of times they'll structure contracts just to take some of the financial burden out of 1 year and put it into another year. And that's what they did with Blake Snell. And it also allows them to hold on to that money longer and not have to necessarily, distribute it right away. So, but what it means is that on a cash basis, they're already pretty darn close to what they spent last year. And, they budget a certain amount for baseball operations. And I know it doesn't count toward your tax payroll, but what you pay your staff is still checks that you write, and they're going to pay $10.5 million to the manager position, between $4 million to Bob Melvin to not manage the team, $3.5 million to Tony Vitello, and a $3 million buyout to the University of Tennessee, which I don't know if that comes on the books this year or next year, but either way, it's money out the door. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that, the Giants, made this move at manager, now they can't get a starting pitcher. They'll get a starting pitcher. They'll get a reliever. They're going to improve this roster. Yeah. But, you've heard Greg Johnson say that somewhat break-even quote that he probably regrets saying. And it's kind of the way the Giants have always operated. Larry Baer would always give me some version of the same line, which is, look, we don't want to just be here one year, here the next year, here the next year, and here next year. We want to try to have the same payroll every year, and run a responsible business. And I do believe that that's the way they look at it. And there have been years where they've taken their shot. They took their shot when they got McCutcheon, Longoria. They went into the tax, and that was Bobby Evans's last year. And they took their shot with Farhan Zaidi, with Chapman, Snell, and Jorge Soler, and went over the tax. And that was Farhan Zaidi's last year. So, it can be dangerous when you have a chief baseball executive who's basically trying to save their job, because they know if they make a big money mistake, someone else is cleaning up the mess. Someone else is dealing with the ramifications of that. So
that's what's happening now a little bit with the Snell contract. But the long-term contracts, I've always been hesitant when it comes to giving them to pitchers. I'm not a GM. It's not my money. But I just think the risk is very, very, very high. I mean, it just is. I mean, I don't think I'm, breaking any new ground here. And you think about it from a Giants perspective. Remember back in 2016 when they signed Johnny Cueto and Jeff Samardzija? I mean, if my numbers serve me correctly, Cueto was 6 years, $120 million, and Samardzija was 5 for $90 million.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money. And I think you can look at that now. And Johnny Cueto, his first year, he was great. Remember, he started the All-Star game. But after that, he didn't do much. So that's one really, really good year, and 5 where he just he was hurt a lot. He didn't pitch much. And Samardzija, same thing. He had a good first year, and then after that, very so. So, I think if you just look at that from was that a good baseball decision? Were those good baseball decisions? Probably not. But long-term deals to starting pitchers. And again, those are 2 examples. Doesn't mean they haven't made good moves, but even Jordan Hicks, right? Jordan Hicks, not ridiculous money, but $44 million on a 4-year deal. I mean, so to me, it's like sometimes it's not how much you spend, Bags, but it's who you spend it on. And I think that's who you spend it on is more important than how much.
Well, I'll give you another one, and don't
play here.
Don't kill me for bringing this one up. But to your point, and no one would begrudge him all the money he made. But after Matt Cain signed his extension, he basically had one good year, and then he was, just kind of taking up a lot of payroll space and really not contributing much at all. And to me, to your point, I think it's almost a double whammy when you give a huge contract to a starting pitcher. It's almost better if they're hurt, to be honest, because if you have a guy with declining stuff, with declining metrics, who's just basically trying to eat innings and not necessarily doing it very effectively, you're chasing one bad investment after another. Now you're just investing innings, where you could give those innings to someone who is more effective, or you could chop it up and use more pitchers or what have you. But one thing I think we really learned during the Farhan years is that there's a lot of value to raising the floor of a roster. And when you have somebody out there who is going to give you, a 4.85 ERA and throw 200 innings, that used to be a badge of pride. Oh, I'm saving the bullpen. I'm contributing those innings. Now, no team wants that. No team wants someone with a 4.5 ERA, to throw, 200 innings. So, it's you really do have to make sure that, when you sign a pitcher, it's got to be kind of a generational pitcher to give that kind of long-term contract to. And, we'll see. Maybe they can find something on the trade market, maybe a Joe Ryan, Freddie Peralta is another name that comes to mind. God, Willie Adames would love that. He's his best buddy. But
I know the Royals too. The Royals got some excess pitching. They're looking for, some outfielders. I thought the Royals could be a match for the Giants as well, as we look into what's going to happen in these winter meetings. But
yeah,